Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm here out at the country house in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's an overcast day, so I'm sitting in a window. It's sort of bright, but hope you can see and hear me okay. I'm very pleased to have Jim Martin with us here, who is the Vice President of 1091, formerly The Orchard. That's the film distribution company for the CE5 movie, and he'll be here asking some questions and joining me periodically in this discussion. We don't have a time limit on this, but we're going to try to cover a whole lot of useful information for folks from all over the world who I see are turning in. So again, welcome. And I want to thank everyone for joining me today, and also all of you who've helped with the crowdfunding at ce5film.com. We could not have made this epic documentary, which is going to be released April 7th. Notwithstanding the coronavirus emergency. We have postponed, most of you may know, the actual live premiere because those gatherings of that many people, 1,000 people, are banned. However, we will have it sometime later in the year, but we are sticking to the release date of April 7th, which is a Tuesday. So we're just about a little over 2 weeks away from the release of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Contact has begun. So I just want to give those sort of updates of what's happening, and then I'm going to get right into it. And Jim, you want to say a few words?
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer, for including me today and for tuning in. I know we're all very excited to hear your feedback and address the public's questions. There's been thousands of comments on social media. I just wanted to say a special thanks to everyone who submitted a comment or question to Dr. Greer during this historic time. So to start this off, let's talk about the coronavirus and the current state of events from your perspective.
Okay, a little bit about my background. Everybody knows this. I'm an emergency doctor, ER, that we used to call them ERs. Now they're called emergency departments. At the old days, they were emergency room, but we actually had like 20 rooms. So then they started calling it EDs instead of ERs. But at any rate, I'm an emergency doctor. Used to be chairman of a very busy, big one. Have a lot of public health and frontline experience, obviously, from that. I probably have seen, I don't know, 60 to 80,000 patients in my career. So I want to make a few comments for the layperson about this coronavirus, or COVID-19 it's called. And that is that it belongs to a family of viruses that include the common cold, except this is not the common cold. It's different from the influenza, but it's 2 or 3 times more contagious than the flu. It's also probably upwards of 5 to 10 times, we're not sure yet, more fatal than the flu. Of course, most people don't die from the flu, but unless you're compromised, sick, have cardiac and respiratory problems and other problems, diabetes, weakened immune system, et cetera, and so on. Nevertheless, this has become a global pandemic, they're calling it, which means that it's everywhere all at once and highly contagious. So that's why we're all kind of on a lockdown basis around the world. It isn't that, and I think there's confusion on this. People being isolated from social gatherings, like our premiere being canceled, isn't ultimately necessarily going to stop how many people ultimately are exposed to the virus. They think 50 to 70% of all of us will get exposed to it. What they're trying to do, and there's a real confusion about this because it has not been explained, I think, that well. They're trying to make this a kind of a slow move through society, or slower than it might be, by people being socially separated, 6 feet or more, et cetera, because it's so contagious. And if so many people who are in the high risk category get sick very quickly, there is no way our hospitals and ERs and ICUs can handle that many people. And if those people can't get critical care, obviously they would most likely die. So this whole measure that's being taken, I know all of California is on lockdown now. Other states are, I know whole countries are, like Italy. That's being done by public health recommendations so that the spread of the virus is slower through society, say over the next year, year and a half, instead of all at once, very quickly, that would so overwhelm. Now, the question is, and I know there's a Harvard public health person who said this recently on the news, we may end up having an overwhelmed medical system and also have shut down the economy, which is the kind of the worst of both worlds, but we don't know yet. So I think they're trying to do this because, number one, we knew this virus was running amok in China in December. People I've spoken to who are PhD level biological researchers had it on their radar in December. They knew it was going to be a problem in the United States. We had cases in the United States already in January, including one fatality I know of from a scientist who had been in China that came home, died 3 days later at age 48 with 3 children. That was in January. We also know that some of the swabs that were taken from people they thought had the flu, which were negative for the flu, they were later tested, unfortunately, a month late because the federal government forbade the testing in Washington State. And finally, the doctors basically said, screw you in Washington. And they said, we're going to test. And it turned out those patients, one of whom was a 19-year-old male, had the coronavirus and was out in society, and no one had quarantined them because the government had forbidden the local doctors from doing the test in Washington State. Now, that's all water under the bridge. I'm just trying to give you some background. The reason we're in this pickle is because actions that should have been stood up in the first half or 3 weeks of January were not. And what that means is we didn't know where this virus was. Governor of Ohio actually made a very interesting comment that his scientists in his state government were saying that if we've got a couple people loose in the community of this, within a couple weeks, there'll be 100,000 people who could potentially be exposed just in the state of Ohio. But what you have to remember when you look at the media is that we have no idea how many people have this virus. There are a lot of people. There's an NBA star that just came out last night, positive for the coronavirus, but is completely without any symptoms. He's a young 26-year-old male, very good shape physically, but he'd been out in society doing things, but had no idea that he was contagious, which he was. So people who test positive but have no symptoms, if they're out and about in society, they seem and appear totally fine, but they are contagious, which means they could come in contact with someone who is, an older person, or someone who is got other health problems, or just someone who doesn't deal well with respiratory problems, and that it could prove to make them extremely sick or even fatal. So that's why they're doing the social distancing, stay 6 feet apart, all of that, because we didn't do enough surveillance in January to know exactly where it was and quarantine, contain limited areas. And now it's everywhere. It's in all 50 states. It's in most countries in the world. And the result is, here we are. So I wanted to give that as sort of some insight into how we got from December to now the third week of March, and how we got to the point where we're all now under a lockdown situation in a lot of states and countries. Now, what we're going to do about it is, I think people need to understand a couple things. Just because your businesses are closed doesn't mean you're under house arrest. So one of my concerns, looking at this holistically, is people need to understand, you should be able to go outside if you keep social distance and go for a walk, go for a run, go biking, go hiking, be outdoors. The worst thing for people is to, sit in front of the television, doing nothing but being filled with anxiety, and not eating well, not exercising, because guess what? That will really damage your immune system. And if your immune system is damaged, when you get this virus, you're going to be much sicker. So we need to take care of ourselves. And part of taking care of ourselves, I'm going to go into a lot of this. One thing that's very obvious, but I'm going to go into it. I don't mean to sound preachy like doctors get to be, But for God's sakes, if you're a smoker, stop it. Use a patch, do anything. 1 or 2 puffs on a cigarette literally paralyzes and alters the little fine cilia and epithelial cells in your airway and lungs so that it can't clear viruses and can't clear bacteria as well. So smoking is something you do not want to be doing when you could be at risk for this virus, number 1. Number 2, eat well and take extra vitamin C and zinc together. There are some formulations together for that. Vitamin D is helpful. And of course, sunlight. There's all this phobia about sunlight, but sunlight has UV radiation, which actually denatures and kills viruses. So it's very nice to be in UV. And actually, there are UV radiation things that you can put over things to sanitize them. A lot of people don't know that, but ultraviolet electromagnetic radiation does denature, what we call it. It kills the virus, basically. So that's something to remember. The other thing that works, not that I'm suggesting people become boozers, but alcohol works really well. Alcohol is the active ingredient, actually in most hand sanitizers. So it can be rubbing alcohol or it can be booze alcohol if people have made a run on it because people are acting, irrationally and hoarding. I had to laugh at the jerk who bought up 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer and was gouging the public for them on Amazon, and Amazon banned him from selling them. And there's a picture of him standing in front of his whole garage stacked with all this stuff he can't sell. Well, karma's a bitch, isn't it? Huh? But anyway, you can create a sanitization if you need to from alcohol. Of any type, whether it's the drinking kind or the rubbing kind. But don't drink the rubbing kind. There are different kinds of alcohol. But ethanol, which is in the booze, if it's like strong booze, it's going to have an antiviral effect. Now, I doubt you're going to want to take a $100 bottle of scotch to sanitize things, but there are inexpensive sources of that same kind of alcohol. The other thing that isn't 100%, but is actually pretty effective is pure lemon juice. Lemon juice is very sanitizing, and it actually does kill viruses. So that's another thing with all the panic and run on commercially formulated products like Purell and others. There are workarounds that are very practical. I'm trying to provide to people just from a scientific point of view, and so I hope that helps. The other thing I think is, and this has been bugging me as I've gone about having to do a few things out in society, is that you'll see with the thing about gloves, okay, the virus doesn't go through your skin, all right? You know what I'm saying? It's not going to go through your hand. It's that if you get it on your hand and you touch your nose or your mouth or whatever, the problem is if you have gloves on doing something and it's not going to go through your skin, but it can be on the glove. And then if it's on your glove and you touch your face and your mouth and your eyes and your nose, you can infect yourself. So whereas if you don't have gloves on and you wash your hands or sanitize them, which you can't do with gloves, most people don't wash their hands with gloves on, you're actually better off. So if you're going to use gloves, use them appropriately and understand what they're for and what they're not for. But if you use gloves over and over, let me give you an example. I was at a place where there was where you check in or out. Sometimes you have a fob, a little key thing. And normally you could go there and swipe and it would go, you wouldn't have to touch anything, it just reads it. Well, they had someone there with gloves on. Everybody listening in business or public health, listen to this carefully. Had someone there with gloves on who took my keys from my hand with a swipe, with gloves on, swiped it, handed it back to me, and then did the next customer. And was doing that over and over and over and over again with no sanitization in between. So what had been a very low risk activity, the person just to hold their own keys and swipe it, became a very high risk activity because someone who owned that business thought that it was going to be safer if they had an employee there taking your keys, swiping them for you, handing them back and doing that for the next customer. It actually greatly expanded the risk of contagion because with each interaction, she could have been passing the virus on to everyone she was giving the keys back to. Does this make sense to people? I'm trying to be, without belaboring this too much, but it's just, there are certain things that are being done by businesses and people that aren't being thought through from a scientific point of view. And that's one of them. I'm not saying that no one should wear gloves. I mean, it's certainly fine to wear gloves. You can throw them away and then wash your hands. But if it's used the way it was being used in that business, you're actually much higher risk as both a consumer and probably the employee, because the employee isn't stopping and sanitizing the hands or washing them in between interactions because they think they're being protected by the gloves. But the gloves don't protect you if you still touch your face with them. So you just need to understand there are a lot of things that get done that are almost like a Pavlovian, it's a Pavlov, the psychologist, a sort of an automatic response that people do mindlessly without understanding what's the purpose of this. I love the George Santayana quote, "Fanaticism consists of redoubling your effort when you have forgotten your goal." Pretty much explains most political parties, religions, and societal groups. But I think in this case, we need to think, what are we doing and what is the purpose behind it? All right. So the whole social distancing thing, 6 feet, that is based on something legitimate, because if someone sneezes or coughs, it can travel up to 3-4 feet, but if you're 6 feet away, it's usually not going to affect you. So that's where they came up with that. Same thing with not shaking hands. I tell people, you just greet someone, you can do this, just like namaste and bow and say hello. So you can do that. So if you're with someone that you're living with or that you're with all the time, so that's your, say, immediate group, that's fine to be out with them because you're with them in your house, wherever. Like my wife and I go together, we're not keeping 6 feet apart, obviously. But if you want to keep your group, let's say, if it's 2 or 3 of you that live together and you're out, that group should stay 6 feet apart from other people and avoid shaking hands and all the usual things. But I think we have to start looking at our psychology here and our spirituality, that if we're locked away from each other because we're social creatures, and we want social interaction, they've done very good studies that stress levels go up. The immune system is injured by people being isolated, lonely, not connected to others, and particularly if they can't get outside, because we evolved being outdoors, and the outdoors is a very expanding, liberating feeling for most people. If you're stuck inside, that's not good. So I don't think it's healthy in the long run for us to be stuck away. You just take the precautions when you go out. Now there's a lot of, I don't know if it's political correctness or judgment being made when people, I know one of the news anchors the other day on CNN was lambasting people in San Francisco for going for a jog, but they weren't near anyone else and they were outside running. There's nothing wrong with that, actually. And they later had a doctor, an ER doctor on that corrected him. But I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there that's being propagated by the media, the government, by people who unfortunately don't have any medical knowledge and are just having this sort of knee-jerk reaction. Everyone, get in a panic and shut yourself off from the world. You can take that too far. And you have to look at the unintended consequences. We could end up with more people committing suicide or killing each other, or being so depressed or being stressed out, having heart attacks and strokes, or injuring their immune system from extreme social isolation, as bad as the virus might be. So I think we have to find some balance, common sense balance here. And that's the first thing I wanted to share with the public, is to bring a little bit of ER doctor hands-on practicality to the issue and the crisis that we're all having to live through. So I hope that made sense. Do you have any questions about that, Jim, or any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Greer. I really appreciate that opening there. I think what we're all really wondering is, what do you think? How long will this last? Do you think we'll be out of this thing in April 19th, or do you think this could go on for a bit longer?
I'm sure it's going to go on for a bit longer. I mean, most experts believe this will be in the community for a year, year and a half. If you look at other pandemics, there's an initial wave. If we do the social isolation, say for a month or two, I think it's probably going to be more like 2 months. Then if people get out and about, then it'll begin to spread again. There'll be a second wave. Now, in the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu, as it was called, it was the second wave that killed the most people, tens of millions of people. So I think that we have to be aware of that. Obviously, the whole world can't stop forever. And most likely, the numbers of people who are ultimately going to be exposed to this are probably get the same whether we shut down our society or not. The difference, as I mentioned, is how many immediate deaths would be, because there are so many people getting sick so quickly who are high risk and get in trouble for their breathing, that they have to be in an ICU or on a ventilator or something. And I used to have to do this all the time in the emergency department, is emergently put people on ventilators. Luckily, I was never in a situation where we didn't have enough of them. But in the whole United States, we just don't have enough to even cover what California might need if a lot of these high-risk patients got sick all at the same time. So what they're really trying to do is spread the contagion out over time. So the medical system, which is inadequate to this challenge, can handle it. Does that make sense? So that
does make sense.
Okay, but in reality, it's very likely to be running amok for probably a year. Some people think a year and a half. Honestly, nobody knows, because since it's COVID-19 is a new virus that only emerged that we know of in December. There's some rumblings it could have been around a little sooner. The other thing that is a little complicating to this, I have to be careful how far I go into this. There are 2 and maybe 3 strains of it. And apparently one of the strains is more lethal than the other, but they haven't quite tracked all where it is. It's believed that the one that's in Iran and Italy is more virulent than some of the ones that were in Asia. And that second strain, that other strain, seems to have a higher mortality rate. But the data isn't conclusive on that yet, but it is known, pretty well accepted. There are 2 strains of it. And one Army biowarfare expert I've spoken to in the past week has said that there are actually probably 3. Hopefully not. But that's the other problem, is that, the more strains there are, they may have different characteristics. But because it is so contagious, it's more contagious than the flu, the normal flu, but has all these really severe complications for certain groups of people, that I think that we're likely to have various aspects of this pandemic running through society in different places. And there could be more than one peak of it. There may be more than one strain. These are all unknown at this point. It's emerging and beginning to be looked at, but that's the other problem. We really haven't done the surveillance. Let me be blunt. In January, we should have stood up 100 to 200 million test kits so that you could be tested and know if you have had it, if you're a carrier, but no symptoms because you're still very contagious. We don't. And so whatever numbers you're seeing are really just numbers based on the testing that's been done, but only an infinitesimal fraction of the population has been tested. So if you have a sample, let's say, of less than 1% of the population, 1% of the United States would be 3.4 million people. We've done nowhere near that number of tests. So you're trying to extrapolate numbers based on an infinite fraction of 1% of the population. And that's no way to do surveillance on a disease. A lot of people are now looking back, like that case in Washington State, where there were these people who had what they thought was the flu. The test for influenza was negative. They later tested it, overriding the federal government, and found it was COVID-19. And that was in, probably somewhere in late January. So it could be that this thing has been out amongst us more than we know, but this is speculation. And the speculation, I don't care who is saying it. I don't care if it's Dr. Fauci or me. Nobody knows how many people have been exposed, how many people are carriers, how many people have already been sick with it who thought they had the cold or flu because no one was getting tested for this. And so we're sort of flying half, in a fog without any radar here, only because without having that level of testing and surveillance of how this virus is spreading, it's all a joke. Whatever numbers you're seeing, just know that it's a faint indicator of what's really going on. Now, the numbers that might be more accurate, particularly if they do some retrospective testing of people who died of what they thought was the flu this past winter, would be people who've actually gotten sick enough to pass away. Because, if you can actually confirm that they had antibodies to this virus in their system, even if they passed away, then you would know. But none of that work's been done yet. That's epidemiological and pathology that hasn't been done yet. So we simply don't know. And so anyone who tells you they do is, not being honest. As Mark Twain said, there are liars, damn liars, and statistics. Well, what does that mean? It means that you can do anything with statistics and manipulate them if you're clever. And I'm not trying to say there's any nefarious purpose here. I'm just saying that people who try to speak with more certainty than they should about something that we have a fraction of 1% of the public that's been tested on something that's this contagious is sort of, you just got to take it with a grain of salt, honestly. Which is why they're assuming the reason we're all on lockdown virtually or social distancing is that they're assuming everyone potentially has it and doesn't know it because they don't have enough test kits. The reagents have been faulty. The CDC first batch of test kits in this country didn't work. It has been the most epic governmental failure that I've seen in my lifetime as a medical doctor. So, and that includes the horror of the 80s and 90s with the HIV crisis. So I think that, which also got out of hand because, frankly, the Pope and Ronald Reagan refused to give educational tools and research tools to stop its spread. And because of their sexual prudishness and homophobia, didn't recommend, all the things that need to be done with condoms and what have you. So that whole epidemic was mismanaged, and that was terrible. But this one's been mismanaged as a critical, fast-moving pandemic, even more so. But that's, as I said, that's water under the bridge. So what do we do now? And that's really kind of what I want to now kind of segue into. Well, what can we do now?
Yeah, I agree, Dr. Greer. And just on your last note here, do you think everyone will need to get tested for this? And then the follow-up question would be, and how long do you think a vaccine might take to make?
I think an optimistic is what they're thinking is 1.5 years to get the vaccine, which means it'll run its course. And this is assuming we can get a vaccine. Some of these viruses are very hard to get a vaccine for because this is an RNA virus. I won't get into the molecular biology of it, but it's sufficient to say many of those are hard to get vaccines for. That's why there's never been a vaccine for HIV. There's the common cold doesn't have a vaccine because they change. Now, we don't know what this one's going to do. It could be that this one will be able to have a vaccine, but unfortunately, that effort has been stood up just recently, and to get it tested to show that it works and that it's safe, they may take every bit of 1.5 years and maybe longer. But by then, the natural run of this virus would have run through our civilization. So that's just the way it is. I don't know if that answered your question or.
Yeah, that does, Dr. Greer. And just on that note, we've been speaking over the past few weeks about this. You've mentioned to me a few times how fast this virus is spreading and that there's a second or potential third strain. Does something seem off here to you as a medical doctor, respectfully?
Yes. I don't know how many people are on this chat or will see this video, but I will tell you that if I were to tell you what I know about this, this YouTube channel would be banned.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so and that's, but I will say that there's something not right here. But obviously, given my work with the Disclosure Project, I've been banned from the mainstream media. If we have all our social media outlets ban us, then we're in a box. So I'm everyone listening, I don't want to be alarmist, but I'm just going to tell you that there's a great deal more known about this. And I think that that's kind of water under the bridge, i.e., where did this come from? How did it emerge? Et cetera, and so on. We have to deal with the hand we've been dealt, and it's out in the community now. The consequences of it are going to be devastating from a public health point of view, but I think from a societal point of view, with the numbers of people who are laid off, they're talking about unemployment possibly going up above what it was in the Great Depression, and I think that's a possibility. And this is a real concern, is that the response to this and the virus itself may have a more devastating effect socially and civilizationally, and how we live and our livelihoods and what have you, than the virus itself. But that's where we are, and I don't control the edicts from the federal or state governments. I'm here to tell you as a doctor what the reality of this virus is and how you can respond to it, but also to respond to it in a way that keeps yourself in a not panicked at all and in a positive state of mind and connected to other people to the extent you can safely, so that you stay strong and you stay healthy and your immune system is enhanced. And as I said, exercise is key to that. Good diet is key to that. Avoiding, bad drug use and smoking cigarettes in particular. I think the deadliest drug there is out there by far is cigarettes. 50,000 people die of overdoses of other drugs in this country every year, but we lose about 500,000 people from cigarette smoking every year in this country. In the United States, around the world, China, it's even worse, because China is now the worst users of, most abundant users of cigarettes, because we got everyone in the world addicted. American tobacco companies got everyone addicted to the damn stuff, horrible stuff. So be very careful about that. And I think the other thing is and from my perspective, before I was a medical doctor, some people in the 73, 74, 75, back before anybody was alive who's listening, probably, I'm just joking. But, and what I learned was that there's this amazing immune response and strengthening of the immune system that happens when you go into deep meditation, which is actually more powerful than sleep. So the meditative state and connecting to this expansive aspect of ourselves that's conscious, that actually is really strengthening to ourselves physically, as well as mentally, psychologically, spiritually. So the meditative faculty, the ability to sit and be quiet and meditate and go into a deep state of relaxation and connect to that aspect of awareness that is beyond your individuality, that is, which is actually infinite. That's what samadhi is when you have a very deep meditation, but even some sense of that where you become calm and centered and feel relaxed and expanded, that is like a super boost to your immune system. And it also creates field coherence with the people we're with, but all over the world. And, this is one of the things that everybody will see on April 7th, when Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind comes out. That we talk about what back then, sort of comically, was called the Maharishi effect, because what they did is we sent people into cities and localities where 1% of the population were experienced meditators who knew how to meditate and go into deep, quiet meditation. And when they did that, let's say the city had, 200,000 people. So that means you'd have 2,000 meditators in the city synced up meditating, deep meditations and prolonged. What they found was that hospital admissions went down, violence went down, shootings, crimes of all kinds went down. There was a field coherence that went out through that whole city, even though the other 99% of the city didn't know those people were in the city. They didn't even know they were there. So it wasn't because there was social media saying, oh, there are all these people meditating, isn't that cool? No, they were not there. This was back before there was social media. And these studies have been done in other settings and proven that there is this beautiful field coherence where things become aligned and coherent, very positive, when more than one person, or groups of people, meditate together in a certain number. And it turns out the threshold number for that seemed to be very effective was about 1%. It's not like a polling booth. You don't need 51% to win the election. This is 1% you win the election, because you then create this harmonic, coherent field that is affecting everyone in your society. Now, how does that happen? Why? One of the things we address in this documentary, which if you want to see a preview of it, it's ce5film.com, or you can go to this YouTube channel and see the trailer, which Jim arranged to have a really great production company do this trailer for us. It's just come out. It's had about 1.2 million views already. And what I think people need to understand is that the science of consciousness, which is a major central chapter of this documentary, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, documents the studies that have been done, very good studies at Princeton and other universities, that show that the consciousness field isn't limited to your body and your ego. It is actually, in physics, it's called entanglement, but it's actually connected to every point in space and time, which means that we are all woven together, even if we're socially separated. We're not separate. We're never separate. And that's beautiful, not only to think about, but to experience. Because when you go into deep meditation, what you experience is the unitive state, the state where the conscious mind, whereby you're awake and I'm awake, is a singularity. There's one conscious field. And what people get confused about, they think, well, I'm conscious and he's conscious and she's conscious. And what you're conscious of is all going to be unique. And even your own individuality, it's like snowflakes, no two are alike. But the capability to be awake, awareness itself, the consciousness field, mind itself, is a singularity. And this is what Erwin Schrödinger said in the early 20th century. He was the father of modern quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, a very well-known physicist. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. Now, what we do as individual humans, we kind of identify that conscious field with ourselves and then cut the rest of it off. So we self-separate. So now that our society is self-separating physically, it may be a good time to talk about the fact that we as a people have been miseducated about who we really are, and that we have been self-separating through identification only with our egos and selves, and not experiencing this universal field of consciousness that weaves all of us together in this fabric of existence. And that science, the science that we're, and this documentary is really kind of amazing because it's a tour de force of this, where we are with disclosure, what the secret government is doing, faking an alien threat, and then goes quickly into the nature of consciousness, the science of entanglement and non-locality in physics, where everything is woven together. And from that into understanding how the close encounters of the fifth kind, CE5 protocols work, but also why they work, or that these interstellar civilizations have to communicate and travel at velocities beyond the speed of light and the speed of electrons and the speed of anything in the 3D cosmos. In order for them to do that, to go from one star system to here, they've had to master the science of consciousness, other dimensions, trans-dimensional physics, communication systems that interface directly with consciousness and what I call clear, coherent thought. Thought that's not just scattered, it's a clear, coherent thought. And that's how we contact these civilizations. And that's what this documentary is going to show. When you see the experiences people have had around the world, because we're trying to focus this film not away from me per se. I mean, unfortunately for me, I'm in the film, but for the public to understand that 100,000 people around the world are doing CE5 and have had amazing experiences. How does that work? And what this film shows through the scientific studies that have been done is it's because the consciousness field is actually the baseline field of existence, of awareness that is woven into every point in space, time, matter, star, photon. Even photons react to your thought of them. And that's been done in scientific studies published in physics journals. So this is like amazing science. So we can't obviously in a 2-hour film cover every scientific study that's been done, but we take a few just to show everyone there's a solid basis for understanding that we're not separate. We're not only not separate from one another in this field of consciousness, but we're not separate from the stars and other points in space, and for that matter, other points in time, because this consciousness field transcends space and time, meaning that it's present in its completeness at every point in space and time. And this is why many of you, I know I had this experience, I met my wife in a lucid precognitive dream. I've been told that because my grandmother is Cherokee, Native American, that there tends to be a lot of lucid dream capability. It's like the Aboriginals in Australia. But whatever the reason is, that's I saw my wife 5 times, 5 nights in a row before I ever met her physically in this plane. And I was introduced to her by this very enlightened master who said, "This is who we want you to marry." Now I'm 22. I have no interest in being married at age 22. But I said, "Oh, okay." And so I went, so I started looking for this person. I told my roommate, I said, "I don't know what her name is, but I know what she looks like." And sure enough, a few weeks later, I was living in the Middle East in Israel, and this woman walks through the gates of this garden. I go, "Damn, that's her." So people have that experience. How can that happen? It's because your conscious mind is tied into this universal field of consciousness all the time, whether you recognize it or not. And that conscious field is in its totality indivisible as a singularity in every point in space, but also every point in time, including the past and the future. Now, a caveat. When you're talking about the future, because of all the complex things that can alter event horizons, I call them, changes of events, the future can be altered by virtue of the fact that someone sees the future and speaks of it. So when you're talking about something you may see into the future, there's not 100% concordance and can never be. This is why all the, I call them, the charlatans and soothsayers that predict things on October 19th, whatever year, this is going to happen. Well, they're almost universally wrong. And the reason they are is that by the time they've given utterance to that, enough changes have happened in this fractal that it's altered the timeline, either up or down, or changed the event horizon altogether. Now, when you're talking about right now, you can go into this quiet state of meditation and see any place on this planet, in another star system, on a spacecraft that's out in our solar system, a spacecraft that's off the Catalina Island, off the coast of Malibu. They're ET craft there. So you can go there and see them and invite them to interact with you. And they may interact with you mentally, so-called telepathically, physically, in light, in thought, a fully materialized craft, least likely to happen, but it happens. And so we show all of this in this documentary. Now, what does this have to do with the coronavirus? Everything. Because two things here I want to segue into. How long have I been talking? I don't want to go in and bore people too much.
No, you're doing great, Dr. Greer. Keep going.
All right. I don't have a time check. Oh, there we are. We've been in about 45 minutes. So, and you tell me to shut up if I'm going on too far into this. But I think that what I really want to share is when we sit together in meditation or by ourselves, we're plugging into this very powerful field of consciousness that can not only do great things to heal ourselves and make ourselves strong, but it also heals the planet and other people. It is beneficial to everyone concerned. So whether or not you have contact with an extraterrestrial spacecraft or individual, and they're acutely aware of what's happening on this planet all the time in real time, what's really important to understand is that the fate of the planet is primarily on the shoulders of the children of Earth. They're there to step in when we're ready to be more open and act like we're nominally civilized, which we are not yet, frankly. We're still having wars. We're still doing stupid things. We're destroying the biosphere unnecessarily. But if you understand this power of consciousness, it means that you can go in and have this beautiful experience for yourself with practice. And we have some of these meditations are on our store at SeriousDisclosure.com. It's kind of a long .com word. And I think there are some YouTube videos of me leading the meditations. But there's also, you can get these, there are various places. We're going to come out with a new app. Fingers crossed, it's being beta tested this weekend. For the release of the film, we hope to have a new app out that'll have all these meditations, but also have the networking function so you can find people in your neighborhood or area to do CE5 with. Because there is a power to doing meditations together. Now, where we're socially distancing, we may be limited in the size of the group, and it may just be the people you're already hanging out with because it's your own little group. But you only need, 2, 3, 4 people. You don't need 1,000 people. I've done it for thousands of people, but I think it's actually more effective when it's a group that's in the 3 to 8 range, because you can achieve more coherence with the group. And when you have coherence for a group, it's actually even more powerful than an individual going into coherence. So that's why they found, getting back to my earlier discussion, when there was this 1% effect, there was a sort of a critical mass that happens when about 1% of a population of people enter into this coherent field state of consciousness. It tends to change everything. And interestingly, in quantum physics, it's called a phase transition, where in certain quantum physics experiments, which we actually go through in this movie, when you hit about 1% of the molecules becoming coherent in a container of, say, helium, at that 1% mark, bang, the entire container becomes coherent. And it takes on a total different phase transition where it's extremely different and coherent, orderly, and peaceful from what it had been before, which was very chaotic. I think that's an exact analogy for where our civilization is. We are at that point of phase transition. But to make it through the chaos, we're going to have to create this field effect in consciousness of meditation and contact, because we're going to need a lot of help from our friends at some point. And to do that, they have to have someone to deal with besides military people chasing them with a jet fighter with their guns on. So who is that? Who the hell is doing this? Well, when I, briefed the Secretary General of the UN and the President, CIA Director, all this stuff in the 90s, they weren't doing it. They didn't understand the first thing about this. The covert programs involved with this only want to do this in the sense of materialistic, getting stronger technologies to create better weapons and to control the population with. But the ETs are waiting for something else. They're waiting for you out there, us, all of us together. And that's what I was shown. And when I was 18, I think most of you know that I died when I was 17. 6 months later, when I was 18, I was up in the mountains of North Carolina, very similar to where I am here, and meditated. I went into a deep meditative state up at the top of this mountain and had a contact with the ETs for several hours on board a ship, where I was teaching them this meditation approach and how humans experience meditation. And I was this young man. I was 18, had just turned 18 in June. This was in October 1973. And what I was told and shown is that this is exactly how civilizations evolve together and become both enlightened individuals, but from that, an enlightened civilization. And it has to reach, however, a certain critical number. It's not enough to have a few people in this state scattered around. There has to be a coordinated coherence. My aspiration, the reason we spent, well, this documentary was actually 45 years in the making, since I was 46 years, since I was 18. But it took 2 years to make it and to get it right. And thank goodness Michael Mazzola, who also helped with the Unacknowledged, stepped up and did a masterful job on this. Michael Mazzola is really a genius of editing, weaving the story together. Now, we collaborated very, very closely, but he's just an amazing creative filmmaker genius, really. And I think that when you see this documentary, it is, I think, an order of magnitude more impactful than Unacknowledged, which, as you all know, has gone viral on Black sites, has had something like 600 million people see it. What I want this to do is to create a coherent field effect with 1% of the population, which on Earth is about 80 million people, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. It's 1 in 100 people who would get this message, do the meditation, and open themselves up in a positive way to contact with these civilizations for the creation of a whole new civilization here. So we have to do the work here. Everyone says, why don't they just land? Why don't they just show themselves? It's the wrong approach. They are not going to just sort of invade into the planet. Now, they're around, and there are certain things that they're keeping track of. But what they're really waiting for, which they hoped would happen in the 50s, but Eisenhower was betrayed by Forward, is why the ET told Colonel Corso when he said, "What's in it for me?" And the ET said, "A new world if you can take it." Now, that was in 1956. I was 1 year old, and now we're in 2020. So, we've lost 60 some years at least of when we could have had a peaceful civilization with open contact, with various civilizations out there that are the lead ambassador civilizations. So let me explain what I mean by that. There are different civilizations. Some have more scientific purposes. Some are doing monitoring. Some are security concerns because of our going into space with weapons and having nuclear weapons, and others that are even worse that I've been briefed on. But there's a core of them that are specifically ambassadors to emerging civilizations, such as ours, and we're emerging as a civilization. Those beings eagerly want to have someone to interface with, but within the right context. I mean, if you want to go out there and you're just curious and go, yeah, let's open a keg of Bud Light and have a party, and they'll do circles in the sky for us to entertain us. They're not interested in someone that stupid, frankly. They're interested in people who are going to do this, and sorry for being so blunt. They're interested in people who are going to do this because they sincerely, in their heart of hearts, understand we're at a time where we need to become a universal civilization, not just an earthbound. And, the whole thing of world unity and world peace, that would have been awesome in the League of Nations in the early 1900s. we have to now go from where we are now to a universally peaceful civilization on Earth and in space quickly. And so that's why I left my medical career. I knew for a fact that we were in an emergency situation that has been devolving out of control for decades. And now here we sit with this strange COVID-19 virus, the origins of which I will not speak about on this platform. However, I will say that we can overcome it, because there's no point panicking in fear, because the power of consciousness in the mind and people working collectively is much more powerful than a virus, and much more powerful than any weapon that any people have ever created, and that we can transform the human future, but also kind of save ourselves by being connected to each other in this beautiful meditative state. Depending on how long this, I don't know if people would want to do this, but we could do this on YouTube periodically, where we could do a global guided meditation, at some point, where it would be very powerful to do it. I think after the film comes out and we have this new app and people can get trained and practice, there is something to practicing meditation. It takes some time to get your vibe going with it, but it's not difficult. When I was 17, I had this stupid thing I did. Teenage boys will be boys. Anyway, I had injured my left leg and bicycled 200 miles in one day, and it got horribly infected. And then I bicycled back 200 miles and got so sick that I had renal and liver failure and 106-degree temperature and coded and died. And I was living alone. I had my own apartment in high school, and I had to support myself, high school, college, med school. And so I didn't have a doctor, because I was very poor and couldn't afford a doctor, because in this country, Europeans listening are horrified, but we don't have any health care for everybody. And so I was so poor. I worked washing dishes at a Red Lobster restaurant, washing pans, actually. And so, you're making $1.60 an hour or something. You're not going to afford going to a doctor or a hospital. So I just got sicker and sicker and died. Luckily, I came back. But in that experience, even though I was raised very atheist, we didn't believe in anything, I had this experience of the universal mind, that it turned out that the consciousness that was at the center of my existence as an individual being was the same as that unbounded being, the infinite unbounded being. And it was such a beautiful experience. I mean, that's why I tell people, the process of dying, you don't want to be miserable, but death itself is beautiful. And you don't need to be afraid of death. But this is not to say you're going to, go and jump off the bridge, but it's just that you have to have a big vision that everything in this dimension is not all that there is, far from it. But what that taught me was that I was never separate. I just never realized it. I never experienced it. And so after that experience, I said, well, gosh, I really want to find out how to connect to that state again. So I heard about a meditation course and took it and began to be a meditator. And a year later, I went off to become a teacher of meditation and learned the Sanskrit and the Vedas, and went all over the world setting up meditation centers. Actually, Louise Hay was one of my students at MIU, Maharishi International University, back in the day. But what I found was we had this ability to connect to that aspect all the time, but it took a little bit of discipline. You have to sit quietly, clear all the nonsense going on around you. It's nice to have a place where you do this on a regular basis in your house, because it creates I hate to use the word power spot, but it creates a Akashic record. It creates an energy there that stays in the fabric of space-time, even when you're not there. So when you have the same place and you meditate in that place, it does create your own little power spot that, for reasons we don't have time to go into. And do that on a regular basis, 2-3 times a day, whenever. And what we're going to have is the ability for people to do this, and then I can guide people through it Uh, and you can do breathing exercises as well before or after you do the meditation, say with a mantra or a little prayer or whatever you like using. I teach people a mantra meditation that's Vedic, Sanskrit, but you can do it other ways. I'm not at all bombastic about you've only got to do it one way. If it works for you, do it. But the key thing is understanding, what are you doing? The technique is not what you're doing. What you're doing is using a tool to allow yourself to settle down and become centered and calm, where you feel connected to this great ocean of unbounded mind. And when you have that experience, and it begins to grow subtly sometimes at first, it is so liberating, and it's also very enhancing to your immune system, your body, your life, your inner guidance, your happiness. Doing that was really important for me. And I'm glad I did it before I was a medical doctor, frankly, because I think if I'd gone the other way around, I might not have ever taken those few years to become a itinerant meditation teacher going all over the world doing this. Because I was, young and free and could do it at that stage of my life. You can't do that when you have 4 children like I do. So I think that, or it's harder to. So I think that's what you want to do, and you practice it. If you do it every day, regularly, you develop this skill, and it initially may seem a little bit, but you have to stay with it. There's a virtue we've lost in our society of discipline, patience, stick-with-itness, a certain rectitude and being patient with yourself. And if you're patient with yourself and just do it with a positive frame of mind that you can do it, you will do it. If you think you can't do it, you can't do it. And it's true of anything in life, right? I mean, all of you who have different jobs, if you've told yourself every day, I can't do this job, you wouldn't be able to do it. If you tell yourself, I can absolutely do this, and then you sit and do it, you will. So I tell people to have faith in yourself and your fellow person. Most humans are very good people. We need to find those people in our community that we can do this with. We first have to understand how to do the meditation, and how the meditation and the technique of what we call coherent thought sequencing, where we remote view and see an ET civilization and communicate with them, coherent thought, how that works. And that's what's in this new app is going to have all that training information. It's not available right now, but I'll tell you what the name of it's going to be. It's a CE5 contact app, and it'll be on the Apple and Google and all those stores. And we hope to have it up and going, if we're lucky, by the April 7th release of the documentary. Why? Because those of you who support what we're doing, what we're really trying to do here is let the documentary be sort of an introduction that inspires people to see that we're not alone, that these civilizations aren't hostile, and that they're waiting for us to make contact. And here's how you do it. And honestly, that's what the intelligence community doesn't want you to know. They are much more concerned about what we're doing with this than with the Disclosure Project. An order of magnitude higher risk. And the reason it is because if millions of people start to do this, it will be like a denial of service hacker to the internet. It will overwhelm the covert government's ability to suppress things. And I want to point out one other thing. The ultimate disclosure that can happen is not just me or you or a few people doing this. Millions of people do this. It's going to cause a field shift in all of civilization that's going to put us on the right track. And that the sort of mind control, mind fuck, excuse my language, that the intelligence community is very good at, such as the 9/11 thing, where the whole world got stampeded into these wars unnecessarily, the whole Gulf of Tonkin event that caused us to go and expand Vietnam unnecessarily. They're very good at manipulating masses of people, which is why us coming together in meditation and doing CE5 in the midst of this corona crisis is actually more important than ever for that exact reason. Because whether this is a crisis that is completely natural or partially natural and partially augmented, doesn't matter. It's an opportunity for demagogues and people to abuse our liberties and freedoms, and we have to be careful of that. And so I think coming together in meditation and consciousness in a way that then affects people we don't even know in our community, but it has this beautiful transformative effect. That's something everyone can do, even when you're in lockdown. And in fact, I mean, if you kept social, you could have 4 or 5 people with you who are keeping 6 feet away that could sit outside and meditate. And you don't have to hug and shake hands. You can do a namaste or something like that to greet and sit around and do this. People can do this in small groups or just with the people they live with. I know that, Jim, you've had amazing CE5 right there in the greater LA area. I was DC when one of my daughters got married, and all the kids went off partying, and we were up on the roof terrace of this house I had in DC, Washington, DC, and we were talking about this, and I was going into that consciousness contact mode, and a red plasma UFO appeared over the city and floated over the city and then vanished. And everyone saw that. Everybody on the roof saw it. So I tell people, this is something you can do anywhere. And whether you see anything with the naked eye or not, remember, 99+% of the time, an actual ET craft is shifted beyond the speed of light. What's called in the movie, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, is called the crossing point of light. And most of the cosmos is resonating beyond the speed and frequency of light and matter. So these ET craft can be 3D, fully materialized, or be shifted just slightly out of this dimension, but just given off some kind of energy field. So there's a lot of subtle nuance to doing CE5. Obviously, the documentary only goes through a small part of it. What I hope to do is, after the film is out, we get this new app out where everyone can, there'll be a messaging service in it, so you can text each other and form your own groups wherever you are. And in fact, I mean, with FaceTime and other technologies, even if you can't get together with your group, you could get together virtually and do the meditations and do it all at the same time, even if you're not sitting next to each other, because remember, consciousness goes beyond space and time. So just remember, there is no distancing within consciousness, because every point in space and time is intimately integrated into every other point through conscious field. This is why humans have been called, and the consciousness itself is a quantum conscious hologram, meaning that a hologram is like, if you see a hologram, you could, of say Marilyn Monroe with her skirt flying up, if you took a little part of that hologram, just say the skirt flying up, and zoomed in on it, the whole image would be within that, and zoomed in again within that. It's all within each other. So each of us are a universal conscious quantum hologram. And so once we acknowledge and understand the science that's proven that this is true, and then begin to practice it and view yourself as connected to everyone in the cosmos, and your neighbors as well. So you can have your CE5 team do this even if you're not sitting right next to each other. But we just do it around the same time, because it has that empowering effect. Now that's one of the mysteries of this. They did some studies with random number generators, which are these devices that pick up, just spits out zeros and ones, that they were using at Princeton University with Dr. John, who I knew before he passed away. And what they found is that if one person is wanting to say that the random number generator put out more zeros than ones, and it shifts and it has that effect. But if 2 people or 3 people who love each other or are connected in unity with each other do it, there's an exponential effect. It's much higher. So there is this mass effect that isn't additively. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4 adding. It's 1, 10, 100, 1,000. So when you get a group in coherence doing this, it has a effect in, I hate to sound like Star Wars or something, the force field, this non-local, omnipresent field of consciousness is affected, but it's even more affected when people are doing it together. So that's that 1% effect that's really been proven in nature with quantum physics with superfluidity and helium, for example. So these are all things that once we understand that, not only the science behind it, but the fact that, gee, that's who we are. We have to go from knowledge and understanding to practice, because it doesn't do any good just to stay up in the headspace. You actually have to sit quietly, do nothing, great Zen expression. You do a breathing technique that may center you first, and then do your meditation and just stay with it for half an hour. And then when you're deep in meditation, then intend very subtly, without a lot of ego, just very intending, to remote view another place in space or time. And if you want to see and connect with ET civilizations, intend that and see if that opens up in your awareness. And with practice, you'll see it will. Because these ET civilizations are actually extremely proficient at this. They have to be, to go faster than the speed of light. All their communication systems are interfacing with the consciousness field and thought, full stop. I mean, we have our cell phones, but the cell phones are traveling at the speed of light, or radio frequencies, right? So that was cool in 1844. Not so cool anymore. So we have to understand that most of life in the universe that's advanced has gone way beyond the speed of light for communication. And that's what this is. This is these meditative technologies, let's call them, and thought science technologies enable us to be on a communicative playing field with these civilizations, because they're not using things that are only at the speed of light. That'd be like someone looking for our civilization by looking for smoke rings or smoke signals. We moved beyond smoke signals, haven't we? So we have to begin to think these advanced civilizations that can go from one galaxy to another, like the ET that you see the picture of that'll be in this movie that came to us at Joshua Tree. I mean, he was from the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years from here. So round trip at the speed of light, that takes 5 million years to get there and back. You know that that's not happening. So they're dealing with sciences and technologies that they have mastered that are beyond the crossing point of light. But when you go beyond the crossing point of light, you're in the realm of thought stuff and what the mystics call the astral cosmos, or maybe your body of light when you have a flying dream and your body flies out, or a near-death experience. There are all these other dimensions, but these civilizations are extremely proficient in that. And if they weren't, they'd still be stuck in their home solar system, period. So once we understand this and get it and begin to practice it, we realize, oh, well, how lucky the great being has folded within you and me and every other sentient being the faculty to be aware of awareness, expand that sense, make contact. And so we're already loaded to go. You don't need anything else. You just need to understand that you can do it and a few instructions of how to do it, and then you're good. You're good to go. And this is the key message, is that, you know, I kind of keep myself away from organizations, and anyone who knows me well knows that I don't like being in the public eye, but I got to be to do what I'm doing. But my objective is that everyone listening would have the ability to do this as proficiently as I ever have if I were to drop dead tonight. Not that I'm planning to, but I'm just saying that my whole objective in all of this, with the movie and the app and everything we're doing, is to empower everyone else to understand that they can do this. You make it your own. You know, I give sort of what I understand has worked, but I'm not, you know, I don't get upset if people adapt it for their own personality or culture or whatever it is. If it works, go for it. Because everyone can do this. You know, we had a man from, I know someone is here from Croatia who wrote into, and it wasn't this person, but it was some other person. It was a truck driver. And he wrote in and he said, oh my God, you know, I was using the old app that we still have. And I was doing the meditation. I was in my truck at a pullover up in the mountains in a remote area. And he was doing this, and an ET craft materialized to his left, came down and floated right over the front of his truck And they contacted him mentally and said, yeah, we hear you. And he was so astonished that that would happen because he was a novice. He was just using the tape, but it works. So these civilizations are really waiting for people who are innocent, pure-hearted. They're not doing this to get rich or to discover something they can aggrandize. And they're not doing it in a way, the spirit of so many people that I meet, call them down. I want to see them. I'm going, yeah, that's not going to happen. They're not interested in someone who wants to make this a carnival or dolphins at SeaWorld. If you want to go see dolphins at SeaWorld, go to SeaWorld and see these poor dolphins who are in captivity. That's not what that's about. If that's your mindset, don't bother. Just meditate. You need to have a sincere desire to be a representative, ambassador, I call it, from humans to these civilizations. They need us. They're waiting for us. They've been waiting for decades. The government ain't going to do it. The UN isn't going to do it. The governor of California is not going to do it. Well, maybe he will someday. All I can say is we, the people, got to do it. And if we do it, it'll be a whole new civilization.
So we have thank you for that message. We have a lot of questions from fans, and I want to make sure we get them in because a lot of people are anxious to hear your take on what's going on with current events. So let's jump into a couple questions if you don't mind.
Yep.
First, this one is from Lloyd Mack 2020, and this says, Dr. Greer, with your inside knowledge and experience as a doctor, do you feel the numbers match up to the response and precautions, media coverage, and so on, or do you feel this could be part of something larger, possibly a hidden agenda?
Well, as I said earlier, the numbers aren't going to match up because we're not doing enough testing to know what the numbers are. I mean, right? We don't know what the numbers are. Number one. Number two, are there other agendas that could piggyback on this to see what they can get away with? Well, usually, I mean, sociopaths and power-hungry psychopaths seldom pass up an opportunity to enhance their position. I mean, look at what happened. Let's take an analogy. After 9/11, there was this thing called the Patriot Act pushed through. No one in Congress read it. Everyone was in such a panic. They took leave of their senses and opened up the whole national security surveillance state so that there were warrantless searches, eavesdropping on everywhere, et cetera, and so on. So I think that what people have to understand is I don't think there's any great conspiracy that's new here, that anything that happens like this can be exploited by demagogues and people who have hidden agendas. And I have no doubt at all that there's a component of that. Now, that doesn't change what we're going to do. I mean, muckraking about these sort of people, which is all very therapeutic sometimes, to sort of, because I get quite irritated. No one's been in the crossfire as much as I have on this. But at a certain point, you have to say, well, what are we going to do about it? Does it change what we're going to do, that knowledge? Not really. We should be doing, here's what I tell people. All this madness, we need to be just above the chaos and form teams of deep coherence, not only for ourselves and our own benefit, but for those around us, because it'll benefit people, as I said, through this 1% effect that don't even know we're doing it. So we need to do that. And we also need to help each other, reach out to people who are isolated. If there are people who live alone, which so many people do, so that they're not completely, isolated and feel cut off, especially when they've lost their jobs or what have you. So I think we need to show kindness and consideration all through society and with people in our community. But I think ultimately we should be aware of the fact that I suspect this situation is going to get worse before it gets better. The reason I'm doing this, the first live YouTube thing I've ever done, is that I think we need to get serious about coming together as a people, understanding the deep meditative state, what we can do with each other, whether we're in social distancing or not, and the effect, the power, large numbers of people coming together can have on the future of a situation like this. It can be transformed. So I think this is why we need to look at this with a big measure of hope. It doesn't mean that you're reckless or act like you're some invincible superhuman, but you have to have hope. And I think that's the key thing. But yes, I think that it's almost certain that this situation, if it hasn't been, which it probably has, will be attempted to be utilized and benefit by people who always benefit. For example, most people don't know this. Those of you who like to do what I call legalized gambling, it's called Wall Street. It's just a giant casino, isn't it? But those of you who like to do that, that's fine. It's a free world. I always point out that when the market goes up and it's slow and it comes up and but the people who make the big money is the what they're called market makers. And when the economy is collapsing, they're shorting the market. They have puts, they have futures, they have all this stuff that are betting it's going to go down, and they almost always know before it is. And they make much more money in a collapsing market than they do when it's going up slowly. Now that's very cynical, but it's the facts. So are people going to benefit from financial collapse by all of us being out of work and not being able to do what we're normally doing? Yeah, sure, they have. I'm sure they've made trillions. So, but that's the nature of the beast of sociopaths, which is unfortunately most people who are the big money. And I don't mean the 1%. I mean the 0.0001% people at the top of the trough, the pig trough of the Goldman Sachs of the world and the JP Morgan Chase folks and people on the deep inside who have information, who always tend to make a lot of money. And if they bet wrong, they got the federal government of the United States, at least in this country, who will inject a few $1 trillion to bail them out. Well, the last Great Recession, the Federal Reserve, most people didn't know this, it was 16 or 17 trillion dollars they injected into the banks around the world to prop them up. It didn't benefit everyone losing their homes and being thrown out on the street particularly, but the banks after that had the biggest record profits in the history of the banking industry. So yes, I think to answer this gentleman's question, there are people with agendas or people who will benefit from anything like this. We just have to accept that there's a certain segment of human population that are unfortunately rather sociopathic. It doesn't mean that we have to change or be, fatalistic, that we can't do anything. On the contrary, I say that that situation has only been able to grow and grow because those of us who should be coherent and doing things together haven't. We keep running around in fear and separation instead of coming together. And we come together, it will completely change that dynamic for everyone.
Thanks, Dr. Greer. That was a great response. I want to go through a couple more questions with you.
Sure.
This one is from David Diamore, and he says, why are extraterrestrials not helping us with this pandemic? They certainly must have much more advanced medicine and technology than we have.
Well, this gets into the whole question of what happens when extremely advanced civilizations are observing an emerging civilization such as ours, and do they intervene in every crisis on that planet? And the answer is they really don't. And the reason they don't is that because then it would look like in 2 seconds, the TTSA, the CIA, and all those folks that are out there in what I call it the fake disclosure efforts, they're going to make hay of it and say, see, we told you so. They're invading us. They're in a lose-lose situation. If the ETs were to intervene too directly in any crisis, that's why they didn't stop Hiroshima and Nagasaki from happening, which incinerated hundreds of thousands of people in an instant. Could they have? Yes, absolutely. They didn't, because if they did, then they would be doing two things. They would be giving the demagogues that like to create an us versus them fight, the argument saying, here's the proof we're being invaded by the ETs. Because these are people who are warmongers and war profiteers who always benefit from a war, any kind of war, any kind of conflict. And they're ready to seize that opportunity. These ETs, I'm quite sure, have a better IQ than I have, which means that they have figured this out very well. The other part of it, which is a little more subtle, I don't know how many people listening are parents, and I'm not to say that we're their children, but if a parent intervenes every time a toddler is about ready to stumble and skin their knees, that child will never learn to walk. Our civilization has got to learn to get up off its back, and you're going to have to crawl and walk before we levitate. But we've got to do that pretty quickly. We're really on our back as a civilization, not just because of this coronavirus, but in general. The last 100 years, we've kept the technologies away that the ETs know we have that would have prevented this crisis. How? Because everyone thinks about how the UFOs are moving, and it's the energy and propulsion and anti-gravity systems. And those are really cool. But as a doctor, I always tell people what people aren't thinking about is that there are corollaries to those technologies that are very related to the physics, transdimensional physics of the propulsion and energy systems of these ET craft that are medically miraculous. They exist in classified projects. They're not allowed to be released. If they are, any physicist is going to see the energy component of it and figure out that it's tapping into a whole other dimension of energy and what have you. So there are very advanced electromagnetic and transdimensional magnetic field effects where something like this virus or bacteria, cancer, all these could be eradicated. I know this absolutely is true. And even beyond that, where I was in an underground lab that I was invited to by some spooks who were medical people back in the 90s, where they had the technologies through these transdimensional electronic physics fields to regenerate a severed spinal cord, or if someone's arm had been cut off, what they call the phantom arm, but it's actually the astral, that subtle energy aspect of the arm, could be regrown and reconstituted. Now, this sounds like science fiction. It is not. That was 25 years ago. I know that these technologies, as a doctor, are there, but those are being suppressed for the same reason the ET and UFO issue is, and that is it would be so disruptive to the people who are benefiting from the existing medical industrial complex, fossil fuel complex, petrodollar system. I mean, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of trillions of dollars in the aggregate effect. So this is why the ultimate disclosure isn't going to be from whatever. I have done a briefing for every president since Clinton. This current president, as soon as he got nominated, a member of his team asked me to put a briefing together, and I gave it to this guy who put it into his hand. I didn't meet him personally. And he got it. Now, whether you read it or not, I don't know. But from my understanding, there's not a lot of reading going on anymore in Washington. But my point is, those people are most likely never going to resolve this issue. But the public coming together, making contact, that would blow the lid off of it. Because once that happens enough, it'll be undeniable that contact's happening and the ETs are going to come in. What are they waiting for? A critical mass of us to get off our behinds and do this. That's what they're waiting for. They're not waiting for the UN or the president. They tried that in the 50s and we're shafted. So now it's you and me have to do this. And if we do that, it's going to be a whole new ball game. And that is the ultimate, I call it the ultimate disclosure, is mass contact. But I couldn't do this, what I'm doing now, until we did the disclosure project and unacknowledged, so that there were enough hundreds of millions of people who knew that this is real and we're not alone. Now that's happened. Now the next phase is people doing this en masse, huge numbers.
Thanks, Dr. Greer. That was a great response. So I just want to segue into maybe three more questions. And there's
Okay.
a lot of calls to do a group meditation before we close this out. People seem pretty excited about that. So why don't we answer a couple more questions, then maybe close out with a meditation?
Yeah, we could. I mean, I've never sat and meditated to a computer, but I guess I can.
Okay.
I'm very much a person, so I don't. Yeah, we can do it.
Okay, we got a lot of people tuned in, so let's keep it going. This next question is from Carrie Leah Dennis 2, and she says, do you know if there's a spiritual purpose and reason behind this pandemic? Could this be preparing us for something like the 1% shift? Could this be a test for humanity?
Yeah, I don't know that per se there's a direct spiritual purpose in it. I think every situation like this is an opportunity for the human spirit to come together. And, basically, if you're given lemons, let's make lemonade. And so I think it's an opportunity to spur us on out of our ordinary humdrum existence to do something wonderful. And I think that it will be what we make of it, is what I'm saying. We can run around like chickens with our head cut off in fear and panic and shut down, or we can open up and connect to each other and to the cosmos and have this be something that makes us realize we've got to do that. And it would then be a very good thing. So I think it's really more about every test and difficulty like this. It's an opportunity to show the deeper spiritual aspect of humanity, our nobility, our goodness, our higher angels, and come together. And that's the test. I mean, that's, whatever kind of crisis we face, now or into the future, that's what we have to make of it. We have to seize that as an opportunity to come together and evolve to the next level as a civilization.
Thank you, Dr. Greer. So another question coming in from Buy12 FAQ, and it says, funny how something like this happened right before you released CE5 and are about to go public with some big new information. Coincidentally, this also happened with the Disclosure Project and 9/11 following. I know you and I have had a lot of conversations the past week about some of your experiences with 9/11 and the Disclosure Project. Do you want to make a comment on this question here?
Well, I have not had an intelligence source directly connect what's going on to what we're doing now. I'll just say that it's strange. It's not surprising to me at all. I anticipated this. And when we did the Disclosure Project in 2001, what a lot of people don't realize is that just as that was taking off, we had hundreds of thousands of people writing members of Congress to get to the bottom of this, because nearly 1 billion people saw the National Press Club event in Washington on May 9th, 2001. And then, I was actually on a disclosure tour out west. I was in Vancouver and gave a talk at Simon Fraser University, and then went down that night, drove across the Canadian-US border and went to Seattle, where on 9/11, I was scheduled to do a presentation to the Seattle area medical society doctors that evening. And I woke up and on 9/11 because I was 3 hours behind the East Coast, and I usually go to bed at 3 or 4 a.m. and get up around noon. I'm a night owl. And I went, oh my God, this is a science fiction movie that they're showing on CNN. And then I realized it was real. And subsequently found out that, what had actually happened. But that night, they called me and said, do you want to do this? I said, yeah, let's do it. I can't go anywhere. All the planes were grounded. So we continued to do exactly what we had mapped out to get the word out for disclosure. And the very day that we had scheduled to go back east after that Northwestern trip and a series of presentations, that was the first day SeaTac, Seattle Airport, was open. And I ended up getting on the first flight I could have taken was the flight we'd always scheduled. And the whole thing was seamless. It's like there was a hidden hand that protected it with all the chaos going on 9/11. I think this is going to be the same thing, but even more. So I just go forward knowing that there's an unseen force that helps and protects. And there's a wonderful Sanskrit saying, the means collect around sattva. Now, sattva is the pure creative force. So if you're doing something with a pure intent and for a higher purpose, the means to do it and the protection for it naturally collect around it by the universe. And I know that's true. So I tell people, stay in that space and you'll be protected and things will be moved along as they should be. And that's what I found. Later, of course, as you know, Jim, I shared with you that there was a senior member of he was the highest ranking scientist at the Naval Research Labs, which is the largest Department of Defense labs. And it's there in Washington, D.C. And I've been there, and this man had been on my team for many years. He routinely briefed senior intelligence and political figures, including at that time the vice president, who was a man named Dick Cheney. And he actually had seen the plans for 9/11 prior to 9/11. But he was told that if he spoke of it, he and his wife and children and grandchildren would all be at some point eliminated. So he never spoke of it publicly. He spoke of it to me. Now he's since passed away, unfortunately, from cancer. So, I will speak of it now. But that's, again, water under the bridge. But it is very worrisome that happened and the timing of it was suspect. But it didn't change what we were going to ultimately do. And this is why it's so important that people take what we're doing with this documentary so very, very seriously. This is not just entertainment. This is to give people the tools and understanding that every individual can make contact. Here's how the results of it. And then the app that's going to come out, it's going to teach you how to do it, but also connect with people in your area. Or if you're traveling, once we can travel again, you'll be able to connect to people anywhere in the world who are doing CE5. It'll be really exciting. Is how we're going to build this global community of both meditation and universal peace and contact.
Oh, I love that, Dr. Greer. So we have two more questions just to wrap up here. This one is from June Magano, and she says, what is the best thing we can do to help ourselves right now? And how long do you think it will be with us globally? How long do you think it will take to return to normal living again?
To answer the last part, I'm not sure that anything's going to be quite normal as, before. This may be a civilizational change. We'll see. I certainly think we are in for some rough stuff for several months or a year, only because I think this pandemic's going to take that long to run its course. And we're probably going to, unless we're very lucky and in the summer it dies down and doesn't reemerge, but we don't know that yet. We don't know how this is going to behave. You can't predict that this will do that just because other coronaviruses have. So the fact is, it could be a pretty rough period for a year or more. What my larger concern is that the virus may run its course, but the havoc it will play in society in terms of the economy and unemployment and people really being distressed will be longer lasting, frankly, than the virus. And so what I'm hoping is that people will be able to get back to normal in a few months. But I think if we do, people should be prepared in every way, everything I mean by that, for real preparation, that there could be a second wave that could even be more virulent than this first one. So, you hope for the best and you plan for the worst is what all emergency doctors do. And so that's just sort of my motto. You hope for the best and you plan for the worst. So that would be, my perspective on it. What was the first part of the question?
Thank you, Dr. Greer. Yeah, I think you'd answer that.
Okay.
She really wanted to know what is the best thing we can do to help ourselves right now.
There's no question that what that is. That's, that's being, reasonably prudent, but then take care of yourself. Really learn to meditate and take this time where you're not having to dash around in your day-to-day life to practice deep meditation and do it with other people if you're with people already. Or you can do it in a way that's with social distancing with people, whether it's electronically or, people that, or that in your area where you keep a social distance and can sit together in quiet meditation and do this. You can do it anywhere. You can do it in your living room if the weather's bad. You can do it in your backyard. You can do it anywhere. And to the extent that, they haven't restricted you getting in your car and going out to a state park or what have you to hike. You could go out to some beautiful areas, so long as you're keeping social distancing. And there's no risk to you or anyone else if you're out in the middle of the wilderness or the countryside, sitting together with the people you normally live with or are close friends with that you're seeing anyway, and meditating. So you can do that, and I think that will really strengthen our civilization, but it'll strengthen your immune system, as I talked about before, because when you go into these deep meditative states, it's a very healing, amazingly healing thing to do. But it also strengthens your whole mind-body complex so that you are more resistant to diseases. But if you get the virus, maybe the effect would be much, much less. So, and you can do that also if somebody does get sick, is to help them meditate, but also do meditation and prayer for them. There are very powerful studies that have been done. They're summarized well in Dr. Larry Dossey's book, Recovering the Soul, where he talks about how even at 1,000 miles away, a group of people praying for someone who's sick or injured has an amazing effect that they've been able to document. Because again, consciousness isn't bound or separated by linear space. And once you understand this concept, you go, wow, yeah, you're as close as your conscious mind and thought wants it to be. And you can have a great effect for people, whether they're in the room with you or on the other side of the planet.
Thank you, Dr. Greer. Well, that was a great response. So we have one more question. I think that might wrap it up, and it's relevant to what I'm hoping we can all do here. Lori told me we've got about 20,000 people on the back end listening live.
Okay.
So this is Mick Joseph's question is, can doing a mass prayer day heal the world of this pandemic? And I want you to answer that. And I know you're not comfortable with it, but I think we should maybe appreciate if you do it. Take us through just a brief prayer to close us out.
Sure, I will. I can't state that it would stop or cure the epidemic. I can say that humanity and everyone doing it would be greatly helped by doing a mass global meditation and prayer. And it wouldn't hurt to ask for a little help from our friends that are interstellar in ways that they feel would be safe to do, and that wouldn't get them into any further defamation, which is, of course, the whole media and UFO subculture and government are all about defaming aliens, because that's the whole zeitgeist of the next war they want. They want an interplanetary war, period. So I think that there are ways we can do this, and I think it would be very, very beneficial. It'd be great to see, what would happen if you had 80 million people doing this all at once. Would suddenly we have a totally different turnaround in how this thing evolves. We might, because even viruses are actually resonating in and out of space-time from a pluripotent field of consciousness. So it's never been done. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if we did it. But, if we organized it, I don't know that we get 80 million people, but maybe we could get 1 million. It'd be really amazing to see.
Absolutely. Well, I think that concludes our questions, Dr. Greer. If you want to take us into this group prayer, I think we'd all really appreciate that.
Yes. Okay. So why don't we all just, if you're not driving or bicycling or walking, close your eyes. And we'll just sit quietly for a moment. And take a deep breath in with your nose and out with your mouth. A very deep breath in with your nose, out with your mouth. Deep. With each inward breath, become centered. And in the center of your forehead, see the light of consciousness. Be aware that you are awake. And with each exhalation, become very relaxed and calm. And your whole body and mind together are centered. And then let our minds follow our breath, very gently, breathing normally. And just gently become aware of the conscious mind watching the breath. You are awake. And become aware that that awareness is watching all things. And your breath changes, and your thoughts, and yourself, and the world around you. But the light of consciousness is changeless. It is infinite. It is one. And as we go more deeply, let us see that this conscious field that we are sensing, without straining, just aware that you are awake, is omnipresent everywhere. And we have trapped it in our identities and selves. But in truth, this conscious spirit is without limits in space or time. And thus it is infinite and eternal. And now being subtly aware of this consciousness, we see it as this vast, infinite ocean. And that ourselves, each of us, are like ripples and waves moving on the surface of this infinite ocean of light, consciousness. And now we can see, as we settle into the deeper aspects of this ocean, that the entirety of creation is emanating from the pure field of just conscious being. And that that conscious being is us. We are all one in this spirit. And going now more deeply and relaxed from the calmness of the depths of the infinite ocean of life and consciousness, we behold the beautiful earth, a blue planet spinning in the vastness of space. And the planet itself is a pure conscious field. And she is awake, and she is an organic living being. And we are all her children, sitting upon her. And so we turn to the Great Spirit and to the Mother Earth and Father Sky and ask that the earth be healed and humanity be healed. And that whatever afflicts humanity dissolves and goes away like a snowflake in the sun. And we are left with a pure and perfect world where we all live together as one people, one universe, in peace on earth and peace with all the civilizations who are waiting for us to welcome them here. And as we gaze upon the earth from this beautiful deep place in consciousness, we see a beautiful light coming from the zenith of existence and from the depths of deep space, enveloping the world in light and enlightenment in peace, and in healing. And we ask that the Great Spirit heal all those who are afflicted and guide each of us onto the path of safety in the days ahead. Namaste. Well, I have to come back now. When I do that, I actually go there. Hope everyone stays connected with us. A few things as we close. Anyone who can help get the word out with what we're doing, please do so on social media. Go to ce5film.com and support us as much as you can as we try to find ways to get the word out about this, notwithstanding the crisis we're in. And I want to thank everyone, Jim, you, and Lori and Michael Moriarty, who are hosting this and helping us, and all the folks who've contributed to get us this far. And let's stay connected together, and I hope we can do this again soon. So stay well, everyone, stay safe, and stay connected with each other, knowing that we are all one being. Thank you.
Thank you.